Okay, so you want to own a school, land, a building, a few dozen teachers, and tuition checks landing in your account every single month for the next 30 years. A waiting list a mile long, kids in uniforms the closest thing to a guaranteed cash machine in America. Here's the problem. Almost none of that is guaranteed, and the part that is true is a lot harder than it looks from the parking lot. By the end of this, you'll know what it actually costs to build and run a private school, why full enrollment doesn't mean you're safe, and why one of the largest school networks in the country collapsed almost overnight despite operating more than 150 campuses. The land and the building. A school doesn't start in a classroom. It starts with a real estate decision, and that decision alone can bury you before a single student enrolls. New private school construction runs somewhere between $230 and $320 per square foot on average nationwide, though that climbs sharply in expensive metros and can push past $600 per square foot in cities like Honolulu or New York. For a standard mid-sized campus, total construction typically lands somewhere between $1.5 million and $4 million, and that's before land, permits, furniture, or a single teacher hired. Then there's the approval gauntlet: zoning boards, fire marshal sign-off, health department clearance on your kitchen, state education department approval of your curriculum and staff credentials, and often a full year of accreditation review before you're even allowed to open your doors. Miss a single piece of that paperwork, and you don't get a warning, you get a shutdown order on a building you've already paid for. Getting the doors open. Before you enroll a single family, you're already spending. A typical private school startup needs $300,000 to $700,000 in payroll reserves just to cover teachers and administrators for the 3 to 6 months before tuition starts flowing, plus another $500,000 to $1 million in operating reserve to survive the first year while enrollment ramps up. Add the construction number, the land, and the reserves together, and a modest, non-flashy private school can easily require $3 to $5 million before it opens, with elite campuses running into the tens of millions, where the money actually comes from. Most people assume tuition is the whole business. It's the engine, but not the whole car. Nationally, average private school tuition sits around $13,000 a year, but that number hides enormous variation. Elite day schools now average closer to $30,000, and the most expensive boarding schools reached a record high average of nearly $49,300 a year, according to a recent industry report. On top of tuition, schools charge application fees, registration fees, transportation, and after-school and summer programs, extra revenue on a building and staff that already exist either way. The pricing psychology. You'd expect schools to price based on cost plus a margin. At the high end, they don't. Elite tuition behaves almost like a luxury, go to higher sticker price signals, exclusivity rather than scaring families away, which is why cutting your price when enrollment is soft is usually the worst move a struggling school can make. Parents read a discount as a warning sign, not a bargain. Instead, most schools keep the list price high and quietly discount it through financial aid for the families they actually want, protecting the brand while competing on price behind the scenes. The number that actually decides whether you survive. Occupancy. Nearly every real cost in a school, the mortgage, salaries, insurance is fixed, and none of it cares how many desks are filled. A classroom built for 30 kids costs the same whether it holds 30 or 18. Run the math on a mid-sized school, and you'll typically find a break-even point somewhere around 70 to 75% capacity. Above that, profit climbs quickly. Below it, Losses climb just as fast because your costs don't shrink with your enrollment, only your revenue does. Here's the uncomfortable part. A school running near 95% full might look like a total success story to the admissions office, but to the finance office, it means there's almost no cushion left before a single bad enrollment year tips the whole thing into deficit. Full isn't safety. Full just means you're one recession away from a steep drop. People are the cost center you can't shrink. Personnel salaries, benefits, payroll tax typically eats up 70 to 90% of a school's entire operating budget. And counterintuitively, private school teachers are usually paid less on average than public school teachers because they don't have union pay scales or state licensing requirements pushing wages up. The trade families are actually buying with tuition as a smaller class size, not necessarily a better paid teacher, and every student you remove from a classroom without raising tuition is a direct cut into your own margin. The failure that shows exactly how this breaks. For years, one company looked like proof that this business could scale like a tech startup. Higher Ground Education, the parent of the Guidepost Montessori network, grew from a handful of schools into more than 150 campuses, backed by over $335 million in venture funding raised since 2020. On paper, it looked like a repeatable formula. Open a school, ride demand, open the next one. But a school doesn't scale the way a tech app does. Every new campus is its own building lease, its own local licensing process, and its own multi-year climb to that break-even occupancy line. Opening new campuses faster than each individual one could mature meant fixed costs were compounding across the whole network, while revenue was still crawling toward break-even, campus by campus. The company reported losses of over $106 million in 2022. More than $103 million in 2023, and $55 million in 2024, operating losses exceeding $440 million over 5 years without ever turning cash flow positive. In early 2025, the company began defaulting on its loans, and lenders started foreclosing on schools one after another. By the time Higher Ground filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in June of that year, the network had shrunk from roughly 150 schools at the end of 2024 to just 7. Some closures reportedly happened with almost no warning to families. The company's own outgoing leadership later admitted, in plain terms, that the eagerness to chase a bigger mission had pushed growth well past what the business could actually support, financially or operationally. The lesson underneath the collapse. The model that works for one school does not automatically work for the 10th school, unless the 10th school is already standing on its own before you add it. A school isn't a business you can hyper-scale on borrowed capital and hope enrollment catches up. It's closer to a very slow, very expensive bet on trust that takes years to build campus by campus and can be wiped out in a single bad semester if you grow faster than that trust can follow. Let's close the loop. You put up several $1 million to open a mid-sized private school. In a strong year at 85% capacity, you might clear a few $100,000 in annual surplus against a total investment that could take decades, not years, to pay back. That's not a flaw in the model. A school was never built to be a fast return. It's a real estate and reputation play that compounds slowly if you let each campus earn its own way before you build the next one. So the next time you see a private school with a waiting list and a beautiful campus, understand what you're actually looking at. You're not looking at a guaranteed cash machine. You're looking at decades of patient, unglamorous math that could have gone very differently with just a few percentage points less enrollment, or a few campuses open too soon.